cannot prevent the horror of war by helping in war. I can only help to prevent it by a refusal to war. Hate cannot be destroyed by hate. It can only be transformed by love. And that is the deepest and most practical religion I know.
Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning. Though our lands are far away, they dream of home. Conscription was introduced in early 1916 and came into force initially in March and was widened out by May-June of 1916, and it included the possibility of exemption on 4 grounds. So that would include that the man involved was undertaking work of national importance or training or being educated towards that role. Serious hardship was also a possible ground of exemption. Financial or domestic circumstances, maybe a care relationship involved there. Ill health obviously allowed a man to be exempted, but at the same time, as a result of yet another compromise, there was a conscience clause, so the ability for a man to claim that he objected to combatant service and possibly be exempted in some shape or form. One of the 16,000 men who applied to be recognised as a conscientious objector to conscription was Walter Ayles, an engineer and a Bristol city councillor. The Bristol Radical History Group restaged his military service tribunal 100 years after it happened, in the place where it had happened.
Well, we are honoured to have Colonel Burgess of Bristol's Own from the British Army here today.
Shame.
I am Alderman Swish, representing Bristol City Council.
And your own pawnbroking business.
Next to Colonel Burgess is Joseph Astle, a railway man working at Temple Meads. He is also the chair of the Bristol branch of the National Union of Railway Workers. The other members of the tribunal are magistrates and businessmen Arthur Perry and Willie Olive, both proud members of the Anchor Society as established by that great philanthropist Edward Colston.
Slave trader.
Right! Order! We must have order, otherwise I will clear this public gallery.
Walter Ailes' treatment by the Military Service Tribunal in Bristol was, I think, very different to that of many objectors. His role as a councillor and the fact that he knew the people who were trying him made his position one of status. So that idea that some objectors were just dismissed out of hand or insulted was certainly not what happened to him. He was given a hearing, he was allowed to read his statement and actually to cross-examine a witness, the military representative in his case.
I take it, Mr. Chairman, that the members of the tribunal have had my appeal read to them.
No, they haven't.
And I ask that it be read.
Certainly.
Shall I read it? To whom it may concern, I apply for absolute exemption from the provisions of the Military Service Act. I am a Christian and a socialist.
It's possible, I think, to speak in terms of 2 broadly different sorts of conscience objector. Those with the principle based on some Christian notions of turning the other cheek, of how best to behave. And that shaded over into the Independent Labour Party. Often the Independent Labour Party politics were regarded as, how we describe it in my part of the world, as come to Jesus socialism. People like Philip Snowden, Walter Ayles was very much in that mould of come to Jesus socialist.
As I believe in a common fatherhood, so I believe in a common worldwide brotherhood. To me, the sacredness that enshrines the life of God enshrines the life of his children. Therefore, I cannot and will not kill.
Well said, sir.
Whereas at the same time coexisting with them, we've got socialists and war resistors of a very different kind. Men who took the view that the war was a war of markets and empire. These are broadly speaking Marxist socialists. And that it was something that didn't really have anything to do with the working class. They had more in common with the German workers who were at the other end of the rifles that were shooting at them.
I spend my life in an endeavour to save lives that are being beaten and destroyed by social and industrial warfare. If I believed in the efficacy of slaughter to remedy evils, I would long ago have advocated the killing of those in England who year after year have been responsible for the sweated and the starved and the slummed. I know, however, in my heart of hearts, that slaughter being wrong is no remedy. I am convinced that if Britain had the supreme faith required to disband its army and navy, and disavow its belief in slaughter as a remedy in any circumstances, that not a single home would have been bereaved.
The traditional view, I think, that's very much accepted, or has been, and is now being challenged to a larger degree, is that conscientious objectors were outsiders, they were seen as cowards, as not being patriotic, as maybe even being a subversive community, as threatening the state, maybe being traitors, or aiming for rebellion and Bolsheviks.
You could generalize by saying that they were vilified, they were condemned, they were in some cases attacked, large amounts of which were often orchestrated by the local press. Stories from barracks across the country, whether it's in Preston, whether it's in barracks at Cleethorpes, whether it's in the barracks at Birkenhead, of conscientious objectors being really very badly treated.
Conscientious objectors during the war were often portrayed as being unmanly, so one can imagine some of the propaganda sort of doing that and portraying them often as effeminate, sometimes even as hiding out in women's clothing to evade conscription.
The military authorities, I think, require answers to some questions. Lieutenant Colonel Burgess?
State precisely the grounds of your objections to combatant service.
Because I believe that to kill a man is to shoot a blow at the heart of God. Killing is murder, even when flags are waved around it or national honour is supposed to be secured by it.
Would you be willing to undertake other work of national importance?
No. Such work could only be considered for the better organisation of a country for the purpose of war, and therefore becomes morally about the projection of the war from the country.
Are you a member of any body, one of whose principles is absolute objection to all forms of military service? And if so, what is that body?
Yes, I am a member of the No Conscription Fellowship, one of whose principal objections is military form of any kind. I am a founding member, and I am also at present a member of its national committee.
Very well, Mr. Ailes. We will write to you.
Exempt him, as the tribunal did the 4 men who worked for your business.
That's totally irrelevant, and I was not involved with those tribunals. Mr. Ailes, please sit down.
Walter and his wife Bertha were active members of the Independent Labour Party, and he was its local organiser. The couple appear to have prepared a strategy for dealing with the tribunal.
I understand that under subsection 16A of Schedule 2 of the regulations, I am entitled to call witnesses in order to elucidate the grounds of my conscientious objection, according to subsection 16B.
Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
I desire to call only one witness. It is the military representative, Lieutenant Colonel Burgess.
Well, the Lieutenant Colonel is here.
I take it, Colonel, you are an officer in His Majesty's army, and know in a general way the duties of a soldier.
Yes.
And I desire to ask you this question. Suppose I enlisted in the army, and was on home garrison duty, and I was captured along with my wife and child, and other comrades. And supposing the Germans threatened to tear my wife and child limb from limb if I refused to divulge certain military secrets about the docks and the channel, which I held in my possession as a member of the docks committee, what would be my duty as a soldier? Let me ask the Colonel 2 further questions of a practical character. Suppose as a soldier in one of a file I were ordered to shoot a condemned man. Would I have to do it?
Certainly.
Even if I knew he were innocent?
Certainly. You must obey orders.
Even if I knew he were innocent and a member of the No Conscription Fellowship, a conscientious objector, or a man like Sheehy Skeffing, an Irish nationalist, but a pacifist shot down by the British Army?
Yes.
My last question is this. Suppose I was sent with my regiment to a strike area where my comrades were on strike. And suppose I were asked to shoot down my trade union comrades on strike. Would I have to do it?
Yes, that is quite true.
Shame on you!
And to shoot down those I believe to be innocent?
Yes.
Murderers! Be ashamed. Shame.
So that, Mr. Chairman, even the worst that can happen to a conscientious objector and the loved ones of a conscientious objector as a result of his refusal to join the army is the same that can happen if he becomes a soldier. I should be expected to watch my wife and child be torn to pieces, and in addition to shoot down men who I know to be innocent, and to shoot down my own trade union comrades as they were shot at Llanelli and Featherstone.
Well said, Walter.
The professional army of pre-war years had historically and traditionally always been available for use by the civil power on those occasions when there were events taking place which were likely to threaten public order. And if you look throughout British 19th century history, you will find the troops being available to support the civil power whenever the crowds got a bit difficult. Lots of cases from my part of the world, from the West Riding in 1891, for example, riots in the middle of Bradford as a consequence of a strike, called out the local military. There was some violence, nobody killed, but some violence took place in Bradford. 2 years later, in 1893, in Featherstone, with a miners' strike, the soldiers actually shot and fired on the striking miners, and there were deaths. Same thing happened in Tunapandy in South Wales, and so on. So the use of the army as to support the civil power wasn't unusual.
The last part of my case is this. I take it that the tribunal can grant 3 kinds of exemption. Absolute, if that meets the case. Exemption from combatant service. An exemption conditional on some form of national service. I cannot take national service because for me, and I do not judge for others, to do so would mean that I would be willing to buy exemption from military service.
Oh, send it off to France.
I refuse to do that. And I cannot take non-combatant service because it is morally wrong to help others to do something you refuse to do on moral grounds. And I therefore claim that the only relief open to Parliament and to this tribunal is that of absolute exemption.
Thank you, Mr. Ayles. We will write to you.
Walter Ayles's refusal to assist the war effort led to him being sent to a series of military camps and prisons. He ended up serving 3 sentences for refusing to obey orders, spending more than 2 years behind bars.
In 1916, 17 conscientious objectors were sent to France and were told that, if they continued to refuse to obey military orders in a war zone, they would be shot. Nevertheless, my husband and the No Conscription Fellowship continued to campaign for a negotiated peace, and at the last minute succeeded in stopping the planned executions. Shortly afterwards, on the 1st of July, the Battle of the Somme began. More than 1 million men on both sides were either killed or wounded. in order to gain just 6 miles of territory. Despite harassment and physical attacks, the Fellowship continued to protest against the war, and at one of their meetings in Glasgow, Walter was arrested and brought back to Bristol in order to stand before a police court on the 13th of November 1916.
There's a silver line through the dark clouds shine. Turn the dark clouds inside out till the boys come home.
Following his arrest for failing to report to the military, he told Bristol magistrates why he had made his stand. Adam Church, the actor who had played him at the reenactment, delivered that speech at a ceremony to mark the placing of a plaque on his former home. Soon after his release from prison, Walter Ailes was voted back onto Bristol City Council and 5 years later elected as the Labour MP for Bristol East.
Because horrible outrages and ghastly crimes have been committed by others, that is no reason why I too should kill and maim and destroy. Experience has proved that to do that is no prevention, but an accentuation, an extension of the tragedy. I was always taught that 2 wrongs don't make a right. I believe that still. I cannot prevent the horrors of war if I am helping in war. I can only help to do that by a refusal to war. Hate cannot be destroyed by hate. It can only be transformed by love. That is the deepest and most practical religion I know.
Bride, I can't help wondering why. Do all those who lie here know why they die? Did they really believe when they answered the call? Did they really believe that this war would end wars? The sorrow, the suffering, the glory, the pain, the killing and dying was all done in vain. For young Willie McBride, it all happened again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they sound the death march as the lowered you done? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the fifes play the flowers of the forest? Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they sound the death march as the lowered you done? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest?